It was late one evening when a curious young man named Evan decided to delve into the dark web. For months he had heard whispers about it, stories of unspeakable horrors, illegal activities, and twisted individuals hidden in the depths of the internet. With a mix of intrigue and apprehension, he downloaded the necessary software, ensuring his identity remained hidden behind layers of encryption. At first, the dark web seemed eerily mundane, just like any other corner of the internet. There were forums, chat rooms, and various marketplaces. But Evan was after something different, something that would give him the rush he was craving. So he began searching for horror stories, stories that could keep him awake at night, stories about things that didn't quite belong in the real world. He stumbled upon a link titled "The Last Secret for Your Eyes Only," and with a shiver of excitement, clicked on it. The page loaded slowly, with black text against a dark background. A cryptic message greeted him. "Are you ready to know the truth? If you dare, continue." Evan hesitated for only a moment before clicking yes. His screen flickered, and for a brief second, the entire page turned to static. When the image cleared, it wasn't a horror story at all. It was a live feed. The camera was grainy, and the view was of a dark, cluttered room. There was a faint sound of breathing, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. The feed was unsteady, but Evan could make out what appeared to be a person sitting in the corner of the room. Their face was obscured, but their posture was unnaturally rigid, as if they were frozen in place. A message popped up in the corner of the screen. "This is real. What you are seeing is happening right now." Evan's heart raced. He leaned in closer, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. The person in the corner remained motionless, but there was something deeply unsettling about the whole scene, like the air itself was thick with something sinister. As the seconds ticked by, a new message appeared. "Look closely. Can you see it?" Evan's eyes darted around the screen, trying to find whatever the message was referring to. And then, in the far corner, something shifted. It was barely noticeable at first, just a flicker, but it grew more pronounced as Evan watched in growing horror. A figure was moving slowly out of the shadows, inching toward the person in the corner. The figure was tall, impossibly tall. Its body was distorted, bent at odd angles, as though it had been stretched beyond human limits. Its skin was pale and smooth, almost translucent, and its eyes were black, like deep, endless voids. Evan's pulse pounded in his ears as the figure reached the person in the corner. There was no sound, no movement, except for the figure's slow approach. And then, just as it was about to touch the person, the feed cut out abruptly, and Evan was left staring at a blank screen. His heart raced as he tried to reload the page, but it wouldn't connect. Panic started to rise in his chest. He checked his connection, but everything appeared normal. The feed was gone. Only the haunting image of the tall, distorted figure remained burned into his mind. Shaken, Evan closed his laptop and tried to brush it off as some kind of sick prank. But as he lay in bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The next morning, he woke up to an email notification. It was from an anonymous sender with the subject line, "You saw it." With trembling hands, he opened the email. Inside, there was only a single line of text, "It's coming for you." His heart sank as a sense of dread washed over him. Evan tried to ignore it, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at him. Days went by, and strange things began to happen. His phone would buzz in the middle of the night with no notifications. He'd hear faint whispers, as if someone were talking just out of reach. His computer, though powered off, would sometimes turn on by itself. But the worst part was when he started seeing glimpses of that figure, the tall, distorted figure, just at the edge of his vision. It wasn't until a week later that Evan's worst fear came to fruition. He was walking home from the store when he caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of a nearby window. His blood ran cold. Standing across the street, just out of sight, was the figure. Its unnaturally long limbs stretched toward him, and its black eyes locked onto his. Evan turned and ran. He sprinted through the streets, looking over his shoulder, but the figure was always just out of reach. Every turn, every corner, it was there, moving silently behind him, like it had been following him the entire time. He could no longer escape. The figure, the thing from the dark web, had followed him into the real world, and he knew deep down that there was no way to outrun it. Evan's story didn't end there. His name soon disappeared from all known records. No one could trace where he went, and no one ever saw him again. The last known image of him was a blurry, grainy photo taken just days before he vanished, his terrified face reflected in a window, staring into the void that was coming for him. As for the dark web, it remained a place where the most twisted and unimaginable horrors lurked, waiting for someone else to stumble across them. But now, Evan's story served as a warning to those who dared to venture too deep. Some things once seen cannot be unseen, and some things once encountered will follow you forever.
Story number 2.
A man named David, a tech enthusiast with a penchant for curiosity, had long been fascinated by the dark web. He'd heard the rumors, seen the stories, and was drawn to the allure of the unknown. He'd ventured into the deepest parts of the internet, where anonymity was the only shield, and everything was hidden beneath layers of encryption. He knew the risks, but the thrill of the forbidden kept pulling him deeper. One evening, after hours of browsing forums, he stumbled upon a link titled "The Eyes in the Shadows." The title intrigued him, and against his better judgment, he clicked. The page loaded, and a black screen appeared with a single line of text. "Are you ready to see what's truly out there?" David hesitated for only a moment before clicking yes. The screen flickered, and suddenly he was staring at a video feed. It was grainy and distorted, but there was no mistaking what he saw. The video was a live stream, and it showed an old, decrepit house, dilapidated furniture, broken windows, and walls stained with something dark. The house was silent, but David could hear a faint sound in the background, whispers too soft to make out. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. At first, David thought it was a trick of the light, but as the figure stepped into view, his blood ran cold. It was humanoid in shape, but disturbingly off. Its arms were unnaturally long, hanging by its sides like ropes. Its skin was ashen, almost gray, and its face was obscured, covered by a mask that seemed to shift as if it was not entirely solid. A message popped up: "Don't look away." David's eyes remained locked on the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure slowly moved through the house, its movements jerky and disjointed. The whispers grew louder, but they were not human, more like a chorus of distorted voices, chanting in a language David couldn't understand. As the figure reached the center of the room, something else caught David's eye. In the corner of the room, partially hidden by the shadows, was another figure, this one even more grotesque. Its body was contorted, its limbs twisted in impossible angles, and its face, if it could even be called that, was a mass of eyes. Hundreds of them, blinking, unblinking, constantly shifting, staring at nothing and everything all at once. David's stomach churned, but he couldn't look away. The figure with the mask suddenly turned its head, its gaze locking with David's. He felt a chill run down his spine, a sensation as if something was reaching through the screen, grasping at him. Then a message appeared on the screen: "It sees you." Before he could react, the feed cut out abruptly, and the screen went black. David sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. His hands were shaking as he tried to refresh the page, but no matter how many times he clicked, it wouldn't load. The video was gone, and the page had vanished into the ether. David tried to rationalize what he had seen. He told himself it was just some elaborate hoax, a sick prank by someone with too much time on their hands. But then, strange things began to happen. The whispers returned, soft, almost inaudible at first, but growing louder each night. They came from nowhere, lingering just outside his reach. He would wake up in the middle of the night, his body drenched in sweat, feeling like he wasn't alone. It started with small things. Objects in his apartment moved, doors that were closed when he knew he had left them open. Then, one night, as he sat in front of his computer, the screen flickered. The cursor moved on its own, and a message appeared. "You looked away. Now it's time to pay the price." His heart stopped. The whispers in his ears became louder, frantic, almost pleading. "It's coming." David rushed to shut down his computer, but before he could, the screen flashed with an image, a grainy, distorted photo of the figure from the video, now standing in his living room. Its long, twisted limbs reached toward him, and its eyes stared into his very soul. It was no longer confined to the video. It was here, in his world. The image vanished, and the room plunged into complete darkness. David stumbled around, fumbling for his phone to turn on the flashlight. When the light illuminated the room, his blood ran cold. The figure was there, standing just beyond the reach of the light, its mask shifting, its eyes watching. Panicked, David bolted out of his apartment and into the night. He didn't stop running until his legs gave out, but no matter how far he ran, he could still hear the whispers, still feel the presence of that thing trailing behind him, just out of sight. The next morning, David's apartment was empty. No sign of struggle, no broken windows, no sign of him at all. His neighbors claimed they hadn't seen him in days, and when the police checked his place, it was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. The only clue left behind was a single grainy photo, taken from inside his apartment, showing him standing by his window, eyes wide with terror, staring out into the dark street. And the whispers, they never stopped. They followed anyone who dared to look too deep into the darkness, anyone who crossed paths with the figure from the dark web. They were still out there, waiting for the next curious soul to take the wrong step.
Story number 3.
One evening, a college student named Claire sat in her dorm room, scrolling through her phone. She'd heard her friends talk about the dark web, how it was a place where anything could be bought or sold, from rare and illegal items to bizarre videos. Most of the time, Claire laughed it off, dismissing the dark web as nothing more than a myth, a dangerous, imaginary place people used to entertain themselves with stories. But one night, when her curiosity got the better of her, she decided to look for herself. Using Tor, she found herself on a forum filled with disturbing discussions and bizarre, cryptic links. Her heart raced as she clicked through the pages, skimming over posts about hidden services that promised everything from untraceable drugs to shady assassins. But what caught her eye was something different, a link titled The Last Photo. Intrigued, Claire clicked the link. The page loaded slowly, showing a blurred image of a small, yet empty room, its floor covered with a thick layer of dust. The walls were gray, and there was an unsettling stillness to the image. Beneath the photo was a single sentence. "This is the last thing anyone ever saw before they disappeared." The words sent a chill down her spine, but she couldn't look away. The page continued with more disturbing photos, empty streets, dark forests, and desolate rooms, each one tagged with similar messages, stories of people who had vanished without a trace after encountering these images. Claire felt uneasy, but she convinced herself that it was all just part of some twisted game. She clicked the next link. Suddenly, the images stopped. The screen went black for a moment before displaying a new message. "You shouldn't have done that." Claire's breath hitched. Her mind raced. It was just a joke, right? Before she could close the page, another image appeared. This time, it was of her dorm room. Her heart nearly stopped. It was a photo taken from outside her window, showing the faint outline of her figure inside, sitting at her desk. The timestamp on the photo was recent, taken only minutes ago. Panic gripped her as she frantically looked around the room, but everything seemed normal. The only noise was the faint hum of her computer. Her fingers trembled as she closed the browser and turned off the computer, trying to calm herself. It had to be a coincidence. She had to have been imagining things. That night, Claire lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. A few hours later, she woke up to the sound of faint scraping, something moving across the floor. She sat up in bed, frozen in terror. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a new message from an unknown number. "It's only a matter of time." Suddenly, she heard a loud crash from outside her door. Claire's heart hammered in her chest as she grabbed her phone, but there was no signal, no bars, no Wi-Fi. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. She could hear something moving down the hallway toward her door. Her breath came in short gasps as she clutched the blankets, trying to stay as silent as possible. Her phone buzzed again, and Claire's eyes widened when she saw the message on the screen. "I'm standing right outside." Her door creaked. A shadow passed under the doorframe. The scraping sound stopped. Then there was a knock, slow and deliberate. Claire's body went cold as she sat frozen, the weight of the silence pressing down on her. The knock came again, this time louder, more insistent. Then, as if responding to her fear, the door handle began to turn. With a burst of adrenaline, Claire bolted from her bed, grabbing her phone and running to the nearest window. But as she pulled the curtain back, her breath caught in her throat. Standing outside, under the dim streetlight, was a figure, dark, hunched, and wearing a mask. It wasn't human. Its body was contorted, its limbs unnaturally long, and its face, a face made entirely of eyes, stared back at her. In a panic, Claire reached for the phone, dialing the campus security number. But before she could press send, another message appeared. "You'll never leave. The last photo was for you." The door to her room burst open, the handle rattling violently as the figure pushed through. Claire screamed, backing away into the corner. The thing slowly stepped into the room, its mask shifting, its eyes narrowing. It whispered something, a sound too low to comprehend, but the message was clear. It wasn't here to play games. The next morning, Claire was gone. Her room was found locked from the inside, with no sign of a struggle. Her phone lay on the desk, the last message still open on the screen: "You'll never leave." Weeks later, another student stumbled upon the same forum, drawn by its cryptic allure. A link titled "The Last Photo" beckoned. The page loaded slowly, revealing the familiar grainy images of abandoned rooms and streets. But this time, there was a new photo. A photo of Claire's dorm room, empty and still, with a new message beneath it. "This is the last thing anyone saw before they disappeared." Some say that if you're brave enough or foolish enough to visit that forum, you may find more photos of people who have vanished after clicking the wrong link. And somewhere in the dark corners of the internet, there are whispers about the thing that follows those who dare to look too deeply. A figure with hundreds of eyes, always waiting for the next curious soul.
Story number 4.
There was a man named Thomas, a loner who spent his nights deep in the dark web. He was fascinated by the unknown, the bizarre, the forbidden. After months of lurking in various forums and browsing encrypted pages, he finally found something that would change his life forever. One night, while browsing through an obscure marketplace, he found an item listed with a single line of description: a door that leads somewhere else. Intrigued, he clicked the link, and a picture appeared on his screen. It showed an old, weathered door with dark wood and rusted hinges. The image seemed oddly unsettling, as though it had been taken in a place long abandoned, and yet the door itself felt alive. Something about it called to Thomas, like it was beckoning him. The page was bare except for a link at the bottom. "Click here if you're ready to see where it leads." Without hesitation, Thomas clicked the link. The screen flickered, and suddenly he was staring at a live feed. It was grainy and distorted, but it was unmistakably a room, a small, dimly lit room, cluttered with old furniture and dust. In the center stood the same door from the picture, now slightly ajar. But there was something wrong with the scene, something that made his stomach churn. The door wasn't just a door, it was breathing. The hinges creaked and groaned as the door slowly opened wider, and Thomas could hear faint whispering from the other side, though the voices were incomprehensible. The feed began to distort even further, the image warping as though something was pushing against the screen. A message appeared: "Don't open it. It opens only for the one who dares." Thomas, now gripped by a mixture of fear and curiosity, kept watching. As the door opened further, something else became visible, an inky blackness beyond it, as if the doorway led to nothingness. But then, something moved in the dark. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and distorted, with limbs that stretched unnaturally long, dragging along the ground like broken branches. Its face was featureless, but its presence was unmistakably malevolent. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. Thomas couldn't look away. His breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped toward the door, its head tilting slightly, as if it had noticed him watching. The screen flickered, the figure's blank face filling the frame. Then a message appeared: "It knows you're here." The camera feed went black for a moment, but when it returned, Thomas saw something that made his blood run cold. The figure was standing in his room, the same one from the screen, its towering, misshapen body looming in the corner of his bedroom. Its twisted limbs stretched out, fingers reaching toward him. Panic surged through him. He scrambled to close the browser, to turn off his computer, but the cursor wouldn't move. The screen froze. The figure's silhouette grew closer, moving across the screen as if it were stepping out of the monitor, crossing the boundary between the virtual and the real. A message appeared. You're not alone anymore. The lights in Thomas's room flickered, casting eerie shadows. He could feel a coldness in the air, an unnatural chill that seeped into his bones. His heart pounded as he finally managed to force the laptop shut. He bolted out of his room, slamming the door behind him, his mind racing with terror. But it was too late. The figure had followed him. It was no longer confined to the screen. He returned to his apartment the next morning, hoping it had all been some twisted nightmare. But when he walked through the door, the unmistakable feeling of dread hit him like a physical force. The door to his bedroom stood open, the air inside stale and cold. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he stepped inside. The desk where his laptop had been was empty, but the faintest outline of a figure lingered in the corner of the room, its long, twisted limbs outstretched. Its presence was unmistakable, the air thick with malevolence. The whispers were back, louder now, scratching at his mind. And, worse still, he saw something in the corner of his vision, a shadow, just out of focus, moving with purpose. Thomas was no longer in control of his body. He could feel his legs moving of their own accord, carrying him toward the figure. His heart raced, but he was powerless to stop himself. His body moved toward the corner of the room, closer and closer to the dark shape that stood there. Suddenly, the whisper stopped. The room grew colder. A voice, unnatural and hollow, echoed in his mind. You opened the door. With a scream, Thomas snapped awake, his eyes wide in terror. His bedroom was exactly as he had left it, empty, still. But the moment he looked down at his phone, a message appeared. Your door is still waiting. He had opened it, and now the thing that waited beyond it was coming for him. Days later, Thomas was never seen again. His friends and family searched for him, but no trace was left behind. His apartment was found exactly as it had been, frozen in time. But on his computer, there was a new file, an image taken the night he disappeared. It showed a dark doorway, slightly ajar, and a figure standing in the shadows, its limbs stretching out, reaching for the next soul to open the door. And to this day, the file remains on his computer, waiting for the next curious person to stumble upon it. Some doors, once opened, never closed.